Hello and welcome to Merlin Reviews. Today we shall be discussing one of the greatest groups of villains in all of anime. That would be the Homunculi from Fullmetal Alchemist. Now this video is a request to discuss the Homunculi from Brotherhood and not the first FMA series. We'll get to them in another video, I'm sure. A homunculus is essentially an artificial human created through the use of alchemy and one of the world's greatest taboos. Centuries before the events of the series, a young slave, who would later be known as the individual Hohenheim, would take it upon himself to study alchemy in the service of his emperor. The primary goal of these experiments was to find a way to achieve immortality. As a byproduct of his alchemy, Hohenheim used part of his own essence to create the first homunculus. It was a conscious being, but was physically limited in its size and shape, and was kept in a small bottle. Coming with great knowledge of alchemy from the truth, a possible afterlife and source of all things, and the primary conduit for alchemy, the homunculus claims to have knowledge that would allow the emperor to achieve immortality. Hohenheim tells the emperor of this information, but finds there is a heavy price, as the lives of many of the citizens of Xerxes must be claimed for such a goal. It turns out the homunculus deceived the emperor, and used a giant transmutation circle that was created to kill the entire population of Xerxes, with the exception of himself and Hohenheim. With the energy from the souls of thousands, he constructed an immortal body based on Hohenheim's likeness, and also gave Hohenheim immortality, effectively making them both living philosopher's stones, in return for helping him. This being would later be known as Father, the evil aspects of Hohenheim in a demonic body, and the creator of all the other homunculi in the series. Father would serve as the primary antagonist, and his goals would be the basis for much of the plot of the series. Due to his experiences, Father would come to believe that for a multitude of reasons, humans were weak and pitiful, and not worthy of being the rulers of the planet. He saw homunculus as the true masters of the world, and would use his knowledge to intimidate, murder, and bribe his way into the heart of the government of Monstrous, and would have thousands massacred in a plot that would go on for centuries. By using his minions to start various conflicts in the course of the nation's history, he would implement his plan to use their deaths to create philosopher's stones and build a giant transmutation circle, in hopes of transmuting all the people of the nation into a single stone, thereby using its power to achieve godhood and perhaps overtake his creator, the ultimate being that was within the truth itself, supposedly. Needless to say, Father is a villain with major ambitions. His plan required both a cold, calculating patience as well as both brutality and charm. He serves as an interesting mirror image to Hohenheim, in that he is partially made from the old alchemist. This makes him a sort of indirect relative to the Elrics. Though he is obviously evil and driven by hatred of all things human, his character is used to explore concepts such as evolution and the survival of the fittest, as well as the nature of humanity in relation to its world. In some ways, it could be argued that due to the actions of humanity, perhaps his perspective is not completely unjustified. Also, his patience in planning is also rather remarkable and admirable. He is also surprisingly more complicated once his true form is revealed and his powers are lost. Much like many of the humans he despises, we do find that he is also flawed, afraid, and uncertain about his own existence just as much as any other person. One could argue this was his true motivation more so than his fear or hatred of humans, but his hatred of the Creator within the truth. This could be an interesting allegory for Satan, as Father does indeed seem to be a fallen angel when confronted with the godlike being. Father is an interesting villain, though I will admit that for most of the series, though I found his powers impressive, his personality seemed rather bland, and I did not find him that complex until the end of the series. Still, as many villains in anime go, he's a fairly good one, though his plans, though ambitious, follow a fairly standard shonen formula. What is more interesting to me are his 7 children, who serve as his henchmen and are one of the best elements of the series, either one for that matter. Believing human emotions were one of their greatest weaknesses, Father extracted these aspects from himself, much like King Piccolo from Dragon Ball or Naraku from Inuyasha, and transferred them into 7 beings, modeled after the 7 deadly sins from Catholicism. These beings are rather interesting unto themselves, but also serve to provide some insight into Father's personality as well. The first homunculi introduced is Lust, an attractive femme fatale who seems to be one of the higher-ranking homunculi due to her loyalty to Father. She was apparently created from all of Father's lustful desires, and uses her intelligence and physical appearance to manipulate others into falling into her master's plans. Like the other homunculi, she has regenerative abilities and near immortality, though her primary ability is to extend her fingers into extremely sharp blades, earning her the nickname of the Ultimate Spear. She is shown to be extremely prideful of her kind and sees humans as a lower form of evolution. In the series, she primarily spies on Colonel Mustang and attempts to prevent him from investigating Laboratory 5. She attempts to gain information from feigning a relationship with Havoc, though she is eventually discovered and attempts to kill Riza Hawkeye. However, she is defeated and dispatched by Colonel Mustang in one of the best fights of the series by far. Lust was very evil and elusive in the series. Though she was imposing, She was really little more than a henchwoman, and her character is never explored in any great length due to her being killed off so early in the series. Overall, I prefer the FMA counterpart over the Brotherhood version. Another fan favorite is the homunculus known as Greed. Known as the ultimate shield, Greed has the ability to rearrange the carbon elements of his body to create a nearly indestructible shell around himself, making his skin as hard as diamond. As the name suggests, Greed is very avaricious, desiring wealth, women, and power more than anything else. Interestingly, Greed is one of the few homunculus to show any real positive characteristics, as he is shown to have some sense of compassion. He is the third of Father's creations and apparently defected as his master's priorities did not align with his own personal desires. Having been trapped in the Devil's Nest with many of the Chimeras, who are the subjects of the government's alchemical experiments, Greed and his minions would capture Alphonse. Greed sought to learn the secrets of Al's body, believing this could be a way to gain true immortality. However, Al is rescued by Edward and Izumi Curtis. Greed is then captured by Wrath and then boiled down to his stone core by Father, after refusing to join him once again. Greed would later return when his stone is planted in Ling Yao. It is this turn of events that spurs the redemption of Greed. Since both his consciousness and the young prince inhabit the same body, they often battle for control due to both of them having a strong will. At first not remembering his past, Greed finds companionship in Ling, as they are united by their ambitions, but also their compassion for their subordinates. After going along with Father's plans for a while, Greed eventually turns on his master once again and seeks to use the power of the stone for himself. In the final battle between Edward and Father, Greed reveals that his true desire was not world domination, but to have true companionship, such as between Edward and all his friends. Greed ultimately sacrifices himself by allowing Father to absorb him, but saving Ling and also weakening Father's body by rearranging his shield to make it less effective. With this final act, Greed is the only homunculus to achieve a complete change for good, and ultimately dies a hero. One of the best known homunculi from the series is Gluttony. More childlike than his siblings, Gluttony is incredibly voracious, having a savage appetite which causes him to go into violent frenzies. This hunger is apparently never fully satisfied, and Gluttony seems to have an affinity for consuming human flesh, particularly that of women. He is normally partnered with Lust, who he seems to have a close bond with. Despite his violent frenzies, Gluttony is the most innocent of the group, showing glee when Greed is reborn and genuine sorrow when Lust dies. He also does not seem to understand that people he eats die permanently, and does not share his creator's disdain for humans. This lack of awareness makes Gluttony more of a pawn than any of the other homunculi, having to be supervised at all times. It is revealed that Gluttony was a false gateway to truth, as one of Father's early experiments. He can activate this by opening his mouth and stomach to suck up anything within range, taking those absorbed to another dimension of endlessness between existence and oblivion. He also has a highly acute sense of smell, allowing him to track his opponents in the dark. After trying to capture Al for a second time, Gluttony is severely injured in a battle with Greed and Lanfan, and is ultimately absorbed by Pride, who feared eradication. Gluttony dies calling out to Lust to save him. One of the more mysterious and simple-minded of the group, Gluttony's true purpose was interesting, and he's actually one of the more redeemable homunculi, and a little more complex than some people might give him credit for. Another of the more memorable homunculi in the series is Envy, a being with the ability to take the form of any individual. An androgynous creature, Envy has a multitude of shape-shifting abilities. Though Envy often uses the form of someone close to his victims to get close to them for stealthy attacks, he can also take a much more monstrous form as well. Though this assassin is not as intelligent as his brethren, Envy has a talent for manipulation only overshadowed by his overconfidence and bad temperament. In addition, Envy seems to be the cruelest of the homunculus, and enjoys causing human misery perhaps more than any of the others. This is motivated by his strong hatred of humans, though we learn later that this hatred is actually driven by his jealousy of the inner strength that humans possess, as well as their emotional relationships with each other, something that homunculus do not seem to typically have. The fourth of his kind to be created, Father birthed him solely for the purpose of wreaking havoc, and causing bloodshed and mistrust across the nation. It was in fact Envy who posed as an Amestrian soldier and killed an Ishvalan child, an event which caused the Ishval civil war, and nearly tore the country apart, and planted deep seeds of mistrust between the people for decades to come. This was an act which Envy took great pride in, and gloated about with glee later on. His most heinous act, of course, was often considered to be the murder of Maze Hughes, as the officer discovered Father's ultimate plan for the nation. This act would be a huge blow for most of the series' main protagonists, particularly the Elrics and Mustang. Envy would eventually be defeated not by the strength of an enemy, but by the compassionate inner strength of humanity, which he envied and hated above all else. Perhaps one of the least interesting homunculus is Sloth. Though he is fairly integral to the plot, Sloth lacks any real personality or development. From a plot perspective, Sloth was an instrumental part of Father's plan, using his massive strength to dig underground to create a giant transmutation circle around the nation of Amestris, for Father to use to create a stone from the souls of all the nation's inhabitants. Sloth keeps true to his namesake, for despite having massive physical potential, he often considers all labor, even life itself, to be a bother. After his initial task is completed, he works as father's bodyguard for the rest of the series. One of the most powerful homunculi is Wrath, who is revealed to be Fuhrer King Bradley. Wrath is unique among the others for being a creation of a secret government project conducted by Father and the military leaders of Monstrous to effectively create the perfect leader. This means that unlike the other homunculi, Wrath was actually human at one point in time. When the stones were injected into all the candidates, all the souls within battled to achieve dominance until one remained. Bradley's toast was the only one in the experiment to survive, though whether or not his soul remained is never made clear. This allows Wrath to age like humans, making his facade of being the Fuhrer more convincing. He is also a master swordsman and is shown to be capable of defeating most foes, making him the second most powerful homunculus next to Pride. This is reinforced by his ability, the Ultimate Eye, which allows him to detect all movements his enemies make before they make them. Though Wrath's hatred of humans runs deeper than most of his species, he manages to keep calm surprisingly well despite this. Interestingly, there may be some internal conflict with Wrath, as it is implied that he did enjoy some elements of a perceived normal human life. In fact, despite his hatred, he did have an admiration for the stubbornness of humanity, as evidenced by the Elrics interfering with their plans. This was a massive contradiction to the ordered life he led. Of all the homunculi, Wrath is easily one of the most respected and feared. The oldest and most powerful of the homunculus next to Father is Pride. The first of his children, it can be therefore inferred that Pride was in fact Father's greatest sin. Posing as the son of Bradley, Salim, Pride shares the most in common with his father, seeing humans as beneath him in all ways, and is truly dedicated to their plan. Therefore, he is the most feared of all the homunculi. Interestingly, while Father treats most humans apathetically, Pride is much crueler, seeing humans as slaves and playthings. His powers allow him to be incredibly dangerous in combat. His true form is similar to Father's original shadow form. Thriving in darkness, anything that comes into contact with his shadow, he can devour. This extension of himself takes on a form of a large black mass comprised of eyes and teeth. It's really quite horrifying. This form was used to keep an eye on the giant transmutation circle and destroy those who stumbled upon it. He can also absorb all the abilities and knowledge of those he consumes, exhibiting his cruelty by killing his brother Gluttony and gaining his abilities as well as his unstoppable hunger. Pride is the only homunculus not to die, but is reduced to an infant human state by Edward Elric, and is presumably left with a wiped mind and a clean slate, living out his life as an ordinary human. Rather ironic considering his original purpose. The Homunculi Brotherhood are one of the best aspects of the series by far, being memorable, dangerous, and interesting villains. Though I prefer some of their counterparts from the original series more, I can't really deny how cool these demonic henchmen are. Despite their monstrous origins, they represent some of the darkest aspects of humanity, one of the series' most compelling attributes. Of all of them, I would say my favorites were Wrath, Pride, and Gluttony, as I thought they were improvements on their counterparts in the first series, though Bradley was more or less the same, just with more badass swordplay. My least favorite would easily be Sloth, since the significance of the character leaves no question which one was better implemented. I like Envy and Greed in this series, though I preferred their counterparts in FMA due to their roles in the series being more personal and influential to Edward's growth. Lust was cool in Brotherhood, though I feel she was far more fleshed out and interesting of a character in the original. Father was a very ambitious villain by shonen standards, and by anime standards in general. He essentially wanted to obtain omnipotence, and was willing to take centuries of planning to slaughter millions, and to eat God, and gain his power. Yeah, that's quite literally what he does. In terms of sheer ambition, he ranks high among anime villains, right up there with Aizen from Bleach. However, much like the stereotypical shonen villain, Father is driven by greed and desire for the ultimate power and hatred towards humanity. Though his ambition is very high, his personality and motivations are pretty standard. Not saying that doesn't work, it's just not very original. Though Father's origins do add some complexity to the character, I've always preferred Dante a little bit more. Overall, the Homunculus of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood are some of the most interesting and entertaining villains of any anime series. And that's my spin on the Homunculus from Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know below. And of course, if you have any requests for discussions for future videos, whether it be comics, anime, video games, television, movies, whatever, feel free to let me know. Alright guys, it's been fun. Merlin out.